Hi, it's Ricky of Moshville Times here once again. Now, I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague Beze of Moshville Times. How are you doing, Beze? How's things over there in Spain?
Very good, Ricky. Very good. Thanks for having me. I'm delighted to join you and have a
Yeah,
chat.
yeah. Well, I take it it'll be a hell of a lot warmer than it is here. It's just -5 in Glasgow, so I take it you're not missing it.
Well, I'm coming back to Scotland next week, and I must admit, every time I'm home, I wonder how I managed to live in it, because you do become a bit acclimatised. I'm a right southern softie now.
Good stuff, good stuff. But we've been talking in the last couple of weeks about a favourite album. We've known over the years that we've known each other. We do have the same album in common, and that album is, of course, Obituary, Cause of Death. So we're going to talk a wee bit about Cause of Death and see what we like about it and why it's so highly regarded as your favourite death metal album. Am I right in saying of all time?
Absolutely. It is the best death
glad...
metal album of all time. Surely not just mine, but it's fact, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I would have cut the interview short there if it wasn't. No. For me, it's the best death metal album of all time. It's easily the album that I've listened to most in my life. But what is it really that makes it your favourite death metal album of all time?
So I've got to say, I mean, to be honest, I mean, it was probably the soundtrack of my teens.
Yeah.
And latterly, I've actually got the album cover tattooed on my arm, which most people think I got back in the day, but actually I only got done about 10 years ago in a kind of midlife crisis moment. But it meant that much to me. But I first heard the album. I mean, my mates and I got into living back in Glasgow, got into metal, the usual ways, Iron Maiden. In fact, the reason we got into Maiden was, and this is a link to this album. My best mate Kenny, Kenny Dunn, who hopefully will listen to this now, lives out in New Zealand. He found the Somewhere in Time album in the school playground, and that got us on this journey into metal. And actually, he came round to my house. This was when your mates came round to your house to see if you were in, before we could phone and text and all that nonsense. Knocked on your door and asked your mum, can I come up and see Brian? And then he came to my room when I was probably 14, 15 years old, with Cause of Death recorded. He bought it on vinyl and recorded it on tape. Wow. And we were back then listening to Slayer, Metallica, Sepultura, Nuclear Assault, mainly thrash stuff. The only other death metal album I think we listened to and loved, which is up there as well, I'd say, was Altars of Madness by Morbid Angel, which maybe as another episode. But he brought this tape in, stuck it on my hi-fi, as we had back then, and I literally was gobsmacked, blown away, really by John Tardy's vocals, more than anything else. Which I thought at first was absolutely disgusting. Like, that's a bit heavy, it's a bit extreme. But was fascinated by this thing and just played it on repeat, and then I got more and more into it, and we'll talk about why. But yeah, that was my intro to it.
Yeah.
What about you?
I was actually, again, I was in my teens, so although I do look younger than you, I was actually working in a factory in Montrose, and a colleague had a radio while the machines were on and stuff like that. He had the radio and it was turned up, and it was a rock show, and I heard this noise. I think that was the best word to describe it. And it was actually at the end of the song, I heard all the vocals and everything like that. What the hell is that? And at the end, the radio presenter said that was Obituary with Body Bags. And I went, what the hell is that? So the relationship didn't work out there, and I was back down the road the following week, and my mum was going into the town, and I don't know if you remember the shop John Menzies. They were selling tapes back in the day, and I asked my mum to get Spiritual Healing and Obituary, Cause of Death, asking my mum to get these for me, because I didn't have money then. So she went into the town and she came back, and I was really looking forward to Spiritual Healing, but she couldn't get that. She only got Cause of Death on tape, and that is the tape. And I listened to it, and I just couldn't put it down. For hours and hours and hours, I just had it on repeat and repeat and repeat. But I was the same as yourself, like into metal. Again, it was John Menzies about Iron Maiden, Number of the Beast, purely because of the album cover. And then I remember saying to my mate Robin, don't listen to this, it's absolute nonsense. And he went, listen to it again. and you'll really like it. And that's exactly what happened. I listened to it again, Run to the Hills, absolutely brilliant. Then as yourself, it just went to thrash, Sepultura and stuff like that. And then when I heard that Obituary, that was me converted. But
well, I think, you mentioned the album cover, so I mean the cover does a lot. I mean, you know, it's a shame now. I mean, with Spotify and all these, you know, streaming services, it's fantastic for just accessing music. But back then, I think we had more of a relationship with music than kids do now. In terms of, you know, you talked about John Menzies. We used to save up our paper round money. My friend Kenny and I both had paper rounds. His was at John Menzies, actually. Saved up our pocket money from our paper rounds and went into town to, you know, Tower Records or Missing Records or whatever, and bought this album that you've been reading about and waiting to buy. And you had something physical there that you could really kind of, you know, relate to. And the album cover of Cause of Death, I think, is one of the absolute classics, you know.
Yeah.
And Michael Whelan artwork, and it's phenomenal. And of course, almost wasn't the album cover because it was supposed to be One Beneath the Remains.
You've taken my one of my facts away there. Do you know who the artist was?
Michael Whelan.
Oh, you spoil me.
Yeah.
Aye.
Yeah. Do you know what it's called?
It's something to do with Lovecraft, isn't it?
Lovecraftian terror or something.
Yeah. But you're not the only one with the Cause of Death tattoo on them. Do you know who else has got the Cause of Death tattoo on them? Because that was meant to be for their album cover. Igor Cavalera.
Yeah.
He's got it as well. So you can imagine he's pretty pissed. But to be honest, if you wanted an album cover on you, I think that is one of the best album covers ever. I love that album cover.
Oh, it's phenomenal.
Aye.
And I think just back then as well, you know, in the early 90s, it was, or 1990 it was released, wasn't it? And it was, you know, we were right into, you know, my friends and I were right into watching horror movies and everything. And it was that whole, you know, reading, you know, horror books, Stephen King books and all that kind of thing. And the imagery and everything was part of it wasn't just the music, you know, it was everything. And then I think the song titles on the album, you know, from Body Bag to Chopped in Half, from the unintelligible lyrics to, but there was a simplicity about it back then. And you know, they were classic song titles. When nowadays I think there's a ridiculous amount of complexity sometimes in album titles and song titles. Back then it was more innocent, and it was what it was.
Yeah. No, definitely, man, definitely. I love the logo on the front cover as well. Absolutely, I love the logo. But you're right in saying though that Obituary are just in for the groove. It's simplistic. I'm wondering if Trevor Perez actually gets bored playing rhythm guitar, because he doesn't play the same riffs, but you know what I mean. There's no complexity. There's no 1,000 mile an hour riffs or anything like that. It's Celtic Frost cover riffs.
Absolutely.
I've seen him. See, when I saw the cover, the cassette cover, and you opened it up and stuff like that, and you saw the band photo of the band, and you saw Trevor Perez. I remember being called Skullface. I loved his eyes. I wanted to be him. I loved his hair. He had a great face and all that, and his eyes. I wanted to be him when I was young.
We were shit scared of him. I mean, lying in the coffins on the back cover, he was a scary dude. And you know what? When you hear him, when you see him in real life on stage, and you hear into him, and he's just a gentle giant. You know, he's a fantastic guitarist. That's
what you find with death metal people. They might write blood and gore or whatever like that, but they're just into horror films and they're decent human beings. You know. But yeah.
Well, I was going to say that the thing for me, and I'm sure we'll probably talk about this for a while, but so I mean, Obituary are up there, probably one of my favourite, if not my favourite bands. But Cause of Death, I think, is a standout album. One because I think the production on it with Scott Burns and Morrison, and the guitar sound is just totally scooped out. There's no mid range. It's, for me, the best death metal. But people talk about the Swedish sound. Absolutely love that, but the Floridian sound that these guys got, you know, with Scott Burns and Morrison, I think it's just phenomenal. But for me, what makes the album is James Murphy, and so I mean, I think that his melody, his solos. I mean, the intro solo on Cause of Death is just absolutely astoundingly good, and I think the way he interplays with Trevor and the layering of the guitars and the melody, it's the most complex Obituary album. But as you say, it's still relatively simple by death metal terms, but it just works so well. And I was quite sad when he left the band. I know he's probably only in for a temporary, but for me, we're not here just talking about James Murphy. There's the whole band as a whole, but he for me is the quintessential death metal guitarist. He's phenomenal.
You're nearly making me cry here. The album for me, the way it stands out is definitely the solos by James Murphy. I love the double bass. Double bass is huge for me, and Donald's double bass in this is just, I can play every riff, I can play every double bass, I can play the drums to it, I can sing all the songs. I can categorically say it's the one album I know from beginning to end, word for word, and how it's played. Still can't play an instrument, but I've done things like garden canes and stuff like that, badminton rackets, doing the guitars. I've done all that. But yeah, James Murphy, I need to reach out and interview him. I think it's testament to him that guitarists that have came into the band since he's left have struggled to play his leads live. I think it's only been recently in the last couple of guys that have been able to do it, but when Alan came back into the band, he couldn't do it.
That's right.
So
Kenny Andrews, is he the current?
I think so.
Right, he's about as good as I think they've had in terms of covering his. But yeah, he's phenomenal.
Yeah, and apparently, like James had a lot of riffs to bring into the band, but they weren't used because the album was more than half written by Alan. So James used that for his band, Disincarnate. Dreams of the Carrying Kind, which is a great album as well.
That's a great album,
Aye. So
Monarch of the Sleeping Marches.
Yes, I played that the other week there, actually. Did.
Well, Skeletal Remains, my top of the album now, which are a band absolutely inspired by Obituary, I would say. But yeah, they do a good cover of that.
Yeah. But it's quite interesting as well, though. Like James wasn't going to be. Well, he wasn't as if he was an afterthought or anything like that. But Frank, the bassist at the time, was going to call his friend Trey, as of the band Morbid Angel. But he decided against it, and he reached out to James. James had just came back from the Death Tour, I think. Electra came back the night before. He had phoned up Scott Burns asking if they knew of a band needing a guitarist, and Obituary were just about to go into the studio that day. So by that night, he was recording with Obituary. It's just unbelievable.
Well, it's amazing how things work out. I mean, Trey Azagthoth, God, I said James quintessential, but I think most people would say, Trey Azagthoth's the best death metal guitarist. But whether or not he would have worked on this album, I don't know. Probably not, to be honest, because I think, I'm not sure he would have.
I think you're right. I don't think I could ever think of Cause of Death the same way if it wasn't James playing on it. I totally agree. But obviously we've got to talk about John's vocals as well. I was like, how's that came from a human being? I remember reading Kerrang, or Crap, as it's called now. It gave it 5 out of 5 stars. And I always remember the opening line, and it said, like, even the deathliest of Deathstar cannot prepare himself for this. So it just got rave reviews everywhere.
Well, do you know, and I think I said when I first heard it, I was kind of shocked, by the vocals, because nobody, even I mentioned other bands that I was listening to, death metal, early death metal bands, in like Death or Morbid Angel, and they still had pretty intelligible lyrics. You can hear what Dave Vincent's singing. You couldn't hear what Donald Tardy was singing. No. You can now because you've tuned yourself to it. But I mean, I would say, people have said this before, I don't think it's an exaggeration. His voice is like, it's another instrument in the band. I mean, it goes to places which, how the hell does he do it? And he can still do it now live. Yeah. And you hear so many people have tried to copy, but nobody comes near. And Absolutely. You hear him, he's obviously been asked to guest vocal on albums. He played on Harmony, or he sang on Harmony Corruption with guys in Napalm. God, that's what he brings that. Brings brings his excellence to that. It's phenomenal.
Yeah. It must have been excellent to live in Florida in that period, just all these bands. Even, I think, production-wise, I'm trying to think off the top of my head an album that comes close to the overall power and sound, and I'm thinking maybe Malevolent Creation. Not the Ten Commandments. What's the one after it? Oh, I can see it. Retribution.
Yes, yeah.
Aye.
Well, I think the first song on the Ten Commandments, I think and the other one, and I'm not sure if it was produced there, so I'm hoping not, but it was Massacre from Beyond.
Yes, it was.
That's those three, I think, are. Yeah. Actually, I've been listening to it recently, but Arise, Sepultura's third album was produced, or third.
That's the best album in my opinion.
And that is the best album, and that's got the same Scott Burns signature on it. But I think you're right. Cause of Death, I think, is, and the sound effects using Cause of Death as well. And they haven't really used sound effects at all. No. You know, they're pretty stripped back and basic, which is part of the charm. But I think the sound effects on that album, you know, from the first track, from Infect to the first track, and you know, just sets the whole atmosphere on the album. It's just unbeatable.
And it's quite good as well. Like it catches people out live. Like when does the song finish and another one start? You know.
Well, I mean, I've been lucky to see them. I've seen Obituary more than I've seen any band, to be honest, live. But I've seen them play Cause of Death from start to finish, and just so good, so good. And you know the other thing as well, it's brilliant now. I remember going to see Obituary in the mid noughties. In fact, I went to see them down at a place called the Sound House. You remember the Sound House?
I was there. I was at that gig.
So that, I mean, I hadn't seen them for years. Because I'd been, you know, I was living away, I was living in London, whatever, and I came back and there must have been, 250 people tops at the gig. Quite a small gig for them. Last time I saw them was in front of a good couple of thousand. And Gojira spotted them.
Yeah.
And Gojira, I thought Gojira, and look what's happened to Gojira now, but it's phenomenal to see. It was almost, I appreciated it because I was so close to them, you know, what that venue was like, and it was like coming back home. But then I was also quite sad to see how little people were going to see them back then, you know, in the kind of lull. But now, you know, they're doing phenomenally well again, which is great, playing in front of big crowds, and they're getting the respect that I think they deserve, you know.
I must admit, I loved The Incomplete as well. Nowhere near as much, but I thought it was a good album. World Demise, I think, is a wee bit underrated. I mean, I think one of the best songs that they've ever written, I Don't Care, is a brilliant song as well. But I think after that, it's a bit hit and miss for me. I was still going to see them live, and as you know, saw them support Slayer because you were there. And I must admit, I walked away from that gig a wee bit disappointed. Okay, they only had a half-hour slot, I think, but they didn't play anything from Cause of Death. But when they do play live and they play for 45 minutes or an hour or whatever like that, if they've got that kind of slot, or if they're headlining, they always play 3, 4, 5 songs from Cause of Death because they know that's the album that made them, I think.
No, I agree. I mean, I think I struggle to be too hard on them because I know I've got so much affection for them, but yeah, the last few albums I think have been, I mean, they're almost a bit formulaic. They're still great. Standalone albums would still be great, right? If you didn't know what the back catalogue was. But the problem, I mean, I guess it happens with a lot of bands, but I think the high watermark for them was set so early on in their career that it's hard, and it's, I think Cause of Death is that much better than any other album they've done. Although I agree with you about World Demise. There's some great tracks on that, and The Incomplete as well.
I think that's happened with so many bands, though. Their best albums were the early ones. I mean, you look at Autopsy as well, Mental Funeral, I regard that as their best album. Anything after that, there's a good couple of songs, but you can listen to Mental Funeral from beginning to end, and there's the exact same with Cause of Death. I can listen to it from beginning to end, as I did the other day. Could I do that with other albums? No.
This is where I think, though, that I mean, albums are always of a time, of a place, and you know how they were feeling at the time, and they had. We talked about James being in the band and what have you. Also, I don't think we can underestimate Scott Burns's
Agreed.
impact on. I mean, we're talking about you mentioned Donald's double bass drum. I mean, he's a phenomenal drummer.
Yeah.
And he's not as technical as Pete Sandoval or George Collier, whoever, but just rhythm, groove, and the thing that stood out on the album in his drumming was the ride cymbal. So there's so much use of the ride cymbal, just ting, and it totally accentuates the riffs, and it just to me the whole package is together. The ride cymbal makes it. I mean, I've described it to people when they're like, my mates who don't know anything about metal, and I'm like, this album is groovy, it's funky, you can dance to it, funky. Right? You know what I mean, right? You can dance to it, right? And the other thing I think, it's why I still listen to it all the time, is, I mean, when I first got that tape from my mate, I mean, I wore that thing out. I remember on my Walkman and everywhere I went. And for me, I used to always have my favourite songs, right? So Cause of Death, Dying, Body Bag were my 3 favourite songs off the album, and Circle of Times probably as well. But now, actually, the more I listen to it, I pick out different
Remind me to come
songs.
back to that, because that's a controversial topic of this conversation.
Okay, right. Well, let's. But I'm going to smooth it over now. I'm going to say the more I listen to it, when I listened to it recently, actually, I pick out different stuff from it. There's always something new I remember or find in it. And for me, my favourite song on the album right now is Turned Inside Out, which back then was probably one of my least favourites. So it's and the more obvious songs are fantastic, but yeah.
Do you know a quote that I still use to this day when I'm doing it? I've even used it for my Moshville Times like snippet at the end, anything to do with death, dying, or being chopped in half or turned inside out, I'm into it. That's exactly what Trevor Perez said on Raw Power way back in the day,
Oh, God, yeah.
Aye. But yes, what makes the album is got an extremely strong beginning, and it's got an extremely strong ending as well, with Memories Remain and Turned Inside Out, Cause of Death. The whole second side of the tape is just But every album has a weak spot, and Circle of the Tyrants for me is the weakest spot. I just don't like the song. I don't like it.
Were you a Celtic Frost fan?
What was that?
Were you a Celtic Frost fan?
Not really.
What?
No. This might be blasphemous. This might be blasphemous, but no. So, I just don't like it, even though it was obituary-sized, is that such a word? I don't get me wrong, it's not a rubbish song or anything like that. It's just by far my least favourite song of the album. I would have preferred another song from Obituary rather than that.
No, I get that, because all the songs they wrote are phenomenal. I quite liked it just because I was a Celtic Frost fan, and I think they've done quite a few Celtic Frost covers from that to Dethroned Emperor, which I just think they do. Everybody does Celtic Frost covers, but Obituary for me are the best covers because it captures that whole slow melody grind. It's and I think a lot of other bands don't come close. But yeah, when I take that, when I listen to it now, it's probably the song I don't rate as much as some of the others, but back then probably it was up there. But
yeah. No, so there you go. I think I don't know what else we can say about the album. It would be one of a handful of albums. I would say it's an all-time classic and give 10 out of 10 and all the rest of it. But we can maybe end it on pleading for the band to do A Cause of Death Part 2. Yeah. And it's an argument that I have with so many people. I even had an interview with Paul Speckman of Master.
Oh, right.
And he was like, he was like, bands progress and all the rest of it. But I'm like, why? Why, when Cause of Death was so successful, so brilliant, why move on to less powerful stuff? And I'm wondering if the band could actually make another Cause of Death.
Maybe they'll listen to this and try, Ricky. Let's hope.
Yeah.
I don't. I don't think they maybe couldn't, right? And I know a lot. I've noticed a trend. A lot of older bands have started kind of going backwards a little bit and recognizing the albums that made them and the albums that fans like the best. I'm thinking of bands like Carcass now, where they've or even At the Gates, who've classic death metal bands who've got fantastic back catalogues and have gone back, and even we can even talk about, controversially, even going into thrash metal genres, bands like Metallica even trying to recapture, and it's they can't really do it, right? But
no,
saw your face there. They can't really do it. Some do okay, but I don't know if how much of that though. Here's a question: how much of that is because, as we've talked about, it was of the time back then?
I know exactly.
Like, you were at a certain period in your life, your formative teenage years. You were finding your way in the world, and this just struck a chord with you. Whereas, maybe that's happening to teenage kids listening to new Obituary albums. I hope it is.
Yeah, I knew you were going to go that direction. I think you're right. Death metal isn't shocking anymore. Back then, in the late 80s and the early 90s, it was. Nothing in the world prepared you for Cause of Death. That recording, nothing did. Okay, they had Slowly We Rot, obviously, but that's a completely different sound to that. And you're right, completely right, when you say that Scott Burns has got a hell of a lot to be thankful for this album. I just wondered if it would sound the same done at another studio, another producer. Would we rave about it as much as we're doing just now? But everything was done at the right time, at the right place, with the right people for that album for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it was a coming together of the stars.
Yes. So I think that's a nice way to end. That was a wee bit of an emotional end to end this, unless you've got any questions or anything like that.
Well, I think we need to explore this. I'm interested in this death metal shocking you, and can it shock you anymore? And I think you're right. We're all on a journey. You got into heavier and heavier stuff. So maybe that's an episode or another episode, or equally, we mentioned some other albums there. Maybe we could talk about them.
I mean, back when Cannibal Corpse were releasing all their album covers with Vincent Locke and all the rest of it, that shocked back then. But you look at the brutal death metal bands, there's a million of them now, and it's all been done before and stuff like that. You'll never recapture how it felt for you back when you first heard it. And it's the same with every new genre, like new metal, that just totally got a whole new fan base and stuff like that because it was brand new. And death metal got their fan base because it was brand new, it was different.
But I thought, maybe it's my age and my sensitivity, and I've got kids and stuff now, but I do listen to some extreme metal bands, some brutal death metal bands now, and I'm a bit I can be quite shocked sometimes. Some of the lyrics, I think.
Oh yeah.
I'm not going to name names, but it's another time for another time. But yeah, I'm thinking this is why when we're talking about this album, there was a simplicity and an honesty in it, and it was shocking. Turned inside out, chopped in half, but you could appreciate the humour in it, right?
Yeah, definitely.
That's been lost, I think, now, and sometimes you're like, really, it's just extremity for extremity's sake, and if it's not backed up by good music, I think that's where you've
and it's funny when you say about the lyrics of the bands of today and stuff like that. There wasn't even a lyric sheet for Cause of Death. I think you heard them say Cause of Death, and that was it.
Rotting in the waste below, pain denies the soul. That's about all I know.
That's it. That even rhymed there. Well done. But yes, I think we'll need to look at another album and focus on that. But I think we've made a good start with this album, Cause of Death. And we played for Obituary to release another album like that. I think, like I say, it's testament when they play live. Like an album that was released 30 odd years ago, they're still playing almost half the album every time they play a headline gig. So they value that album as well. So who knows? Maybe we've started something here.
Let's hope so.
Well, thanks a lot, Beze. Thanks a lot for this chat, and this will not be the last time we'll do this.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, and take care.
Yeah, you too, man. You too.